All right, welcome everyone to State of Sponge 20. Hopefully we can, hopefully we'll have a good time. First of all, this is a more pared back event than our usual State of Sponge. We've tried to go for a more minimalistic one, less fanfare, and we're wanting to engage more so with the developers and just ask about the state of the project, where things are headed, and listen to your questions, pass those along, and see what they have to say. Okay, so first of all, those that we have in attendance, can I get you all to sound off one by one? So first we have, actually some will remain muted. First we have Blake Anderson.
Hi all, how's it going?
Jill Spiral.
Good evening, everyone.
Faith Gaya.
Hello.
Inscrutable.
Greetings.
And Morph, who will remain silent for the time being. All right, so we may have a few joining throughout, or may stay paired down, but as always, we welcome the input. Okay, so first off, I will pass over to Jewel, who's our resident lead developer here at the moment, and get him to update us on the, well, first of all, we're now running Minecraft 1.18.2 with API 9. So I'd like him to update us on the state of development that we've had there and some of the challenges that we've had along the way that we've overcome. So passing on to you, Joel.
Thank you very much, Owen. So, hello everyone. It's been a bit of time since we've done something like this, and we were keen to kind of try it, even in a bit of this pared down format. We've been wanting to kind of talk about just sort of bring everybody up to speed a little bit. It's nice just to see so many Minecraft faces. So thank you very much for joining us on the server, or if you're joining us through Twitch, it is greatly appreciated. So, since the last State of Sponge, we've done quite a lot, believe it or not. API 8, as you well know, for 1.16.5 was years and years in the making, and I'm pleased to say that we finally released it. We finally released it at the top of the year. But it's just the beginning of a journey. As you know, we're looking at the minute for doing SpongeForge for 1.16.5, and we still continue to do so. We also, as we all are aware, we're on 1.18.2, and we actually recently released API 9. And this is kind of a trend we want to continue. We want to get back to developing and releasing the APIs for each major version of Minecraft. It's not been without its challenges. As many of you know, 1.12 is a version that a lot of you may still use, and we know you still use it and love it as our SpongeForge version, because lots of mods stuck on the 1.12 kind of stuck on 1.12 and haven't moved on. But the reason for that is because Mojang have made so many changes to the back end, the code base. There have been so many unique challenges as the developers of this team, including Faith here, can testify, and Morph as well. But we are moving forward. We are trying to keep it going, and it is still with its challenges. Forge has become a very different ecosystem as well. Getting Forge 1.16.5 has been a monumental challenge, and is still a bit of a challenge to get things working. However, we still look to support that. We know some of you have started asking about 1.18.2. We want to kind of get the 1.16 build stable first for SpongeForge before we move on to looking at 1.18. We don't have the manpower to really support both and try and develop completely for both. We'd still like to kind of keep things running and kind of do some maintenance on 1.16 once we're quite happy with the state of it. But that is why we haven't looked at the 1.18 for SpongeForge yet, which itself has its own challenges, because not only have we seen changes in how the Minecraft code base looks, what it looks like, it's moved on now to kind of, there's been the change in the Java version, and that has been challenging. Any of you that developers know that Java 9, Java 10, and moving on all the way up to Java 17 brings some huge improvements to the Java ecosystem, but it also brings the module system, and that, particularly for something like our modding platform, where we are modding an existing code base and we're working on an existing modding code base like Forge, we find that there are challenges with integrating with the module system that Forge is now using. So there are challenges. but we are looking at moving on forward to that. I've spoken to, so yes, there is that. Spoken about SpongeForge there. I do also want to talk a bit about Sponge Vanilla. That is kind of our test bed. It's our nice vanilla experience. It lets us test everything early. And some of you might be asking what's going on with 119. Well, Faith in particular, Faith and Morph, I have to say thank you so much to them. They have put in a lot of work to get 119 running. We haven't got the builds available just yet. We are looking just to kind of make sure they are properly stable. I think Faith's quote to me earlier when I asked about it was, it does start running and it doesn't crash, which is obviously a good sign, but we want to make sure that at least your Sponge experience isn't, oh, my player joins and it crashes. Once we get to a point where we think that's great, we need people to test it more now, we will release 119 builds for people to try. Again, they will be in experimental states. Again, we still want to sort of make some tweaks to the API. We have to kind of wait for the next version of Adventure, because there are challenges around the signed chat messages and the player report functions that you've heard about. We want to kind of just make sure that the world gen, again, Faith is doing a Herculean job on that. And again, I cannot thank him enough on looking at the world gen and making it so that we have something that is effectively kick-ass, something that you guys will want to use and will be able to do some really powerful things on a vanilla system. So 119 is also coming. We are looking at it. We were just having the discussion about it. We can't wait to get it out in your hands as well. But Mojang and Minecraft is going through these multiple periods of changes. It's gone through its back-end code change, and it's going through its registry stuff. And now with the signed chat messages, which is the intention, at least, is to make your servers safer. We just need to make sure we can support all of that so that you can run the servers that you want to run in your way. So, development is ongoing. We are seeing people starting to produce pull requests, having a look at the code. If you want things to go faster, remember we are a volunteer organization. Please have a look, report bugs. If you're good with code, you want to get into the Sponge ecosystem, you want to see how things fit together, have a look at the code, talk to us in Discord, in the Sponge channel, submit pull requests. That's how we make Sponge better as a community for the community. So that's kind of where we are with Sponge in a nutshell. I'm sure some of you may have more pointed questions that you might want to ask. Please feel free to ask them in the Twitch chat. We have our wonderful community team hopefully looking at it. Please maybe ask in Discord, maybe ask in the general chat or whatever. We do want your questions. So yeah, please feel free. So hopefully that kind of gives you your update in a nutshell. Thank you very much for listening. Owen, I shall throw it back to you.
Okay, thanks for that. It was very comprehensive, as is usual. So we always appreciate that. So, good overview on where the development side is going, and I note, of course, the request for people to submit pull requests and so on, which is we're always keen to do. So please go to github.com/spongepowered. You can take a look at all the code there. It is fully open source. Check it out. If there's something you think you can contribute to, please do. We welcome the help. And if you've got a good pull request, our developers can work with you and try and get up to scratch and submit it in, and you can have your code in Sponge. This is purely for our own benefit, of course. Contributing to these sorts of projects is always nice. It helps go back to the community. And of course, development isn't the only thing you can contribute to. I'm going to shout out to our docs team lead here, Mr. Inscrutable. Inscrutable, now's your time to plug the docs.
Gods. Yeah, look, we could seriously use some contributions. One of the real problems we have with the docs at the moment is the fact that a lot of the stuff that we have present in our API 8 version was really written for API 7. And so, if you look at the plugins pages and so forth, a lot of methods have subtly changed. Some are gone and some are very dramatically changed. And so what we really need to do is systematically go through and have those changed. But it's a long process. So we could certainly use contribution from anyone else who is familiar with the Sponge API enough to be able to come through and help us say, well, that needs changing to this now. Because otherwise it's just such a long-winded process. It's going to take us forever to go through it, given that we have about 2 or 3 active doc staff at the moment. We could also use volunteers too, so that would be really helpful. But in general, most of what we have in our API 8 pages for the docs are essentially just extended from API 7, which is good because most of it really hasn't changed dramatically in terms of its use cases. But the plugins pages in particular are the problematic ones where we need to look through and say, well, okay, this method no longer works.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So that's a really good one for anyone who's a current plugin developer to come in, check out the pages. You are the ones who have the working knowledge of the API, actually using it, and that's really appreciated once it comes to the docs. So our developers are always very busy actually putting together the implementation and the API. But yes, when it comes down to the nitty-gritty, you're the ones doing the work with the API. And if you find interesting things you can do with it, we would love to see that documented. Not just interesting things, even general things. If something is out of place, we don't have infinite time. It's always appreciated that you submit to that. And it's not just development stuff either. We've got other stuff like translations, Mr. I.
Yeah, well, the translations is another matter entirely. So, those of you that speak languages other than English or American, it would be very helpful if you could jump in and help us on with our translations too. Certainly that's an active process that's ongoing. And, there's some languages that obviously have a great deal more strength than others in this particular regard. In fact, if language doesn't have enough translations, it just doesn't appear on the docs because it's just it's not worth publishing. Because less than 5%. It's something like half a dozen pages.
Yeah, there's a lot to do, and we recently went through a migration, I believe.
Well, the docs have migrated a whole bunch of ways. I mean, this is one of the problems. They started out not on CrowdIn, but I think TransFX. So. But yeah, we've actually transferred to a professional instance on CrowdIn, which was nice. They sort of basically turned around and said, "Hey, would you like this really, really pro instance? We'll give it to you for free because you're a voluntary open source organization." We said, "Yay!" Not realizing, of course, they hadn't necessarily tested it with an organization the size of ours, and we had lots of problems porting users over from the old to the new. I think most of that's been sorted out now. So, if you were a translator and you're not anymore, that's because you haven't ported from the old system to the new. We tried to sort of retain ownership of anything that had been translated, but not everything that way worked perfectly.
Yeah, so it was quite an interesting time, and I'm still quite thankful that we've been able to move everything over, and it seems like the new system's working well.
Yeah, we need to thank Felix too. He's one of the guys who did most of the hard work here. He ended up doing a lot of the interaction between us and CrowdIn to make sure that this thing went on and worked, and that took a long time, unfortunately. So yeah, he's a true hero through this process, getting that done. I think we were crazy to accept it, but we did it.
Yes. So yeah, we welcome anyone to contribute to the docs and to the translations. And translations are a really big one because we know we have quite a few members of the international community here. People in this chat are already from all across the world, and several speak other languages. So it's really useful to get it translated, and it really helps other developers get started and just users setting up their servers for the first time. We can't forget them. Okay, so I think that's the documentation done. Would anyone else like to discuss anything before I move on to some Q&As?
I was going to pipe something else up. I asked a question earlier about velocity, and I've actually had one of the members of the crowd, was it 5DB, answer about the nature of velocities. Because we were wondering where velocity was going to end up after it's, changed hands and so forth. I mean, we had some issues too with, finding proxy solutions in general that work with Sponge over the course. So I wouldn't be knowing where the situation lies in that regard.
So I'll take that onto the actual question. So Setharoth asked, will SpongeForge 1.16 Plus attempt to support proxy velocity configurations like in 1.12?
So the problem is that people looking for proxy solutions are generally looking for SpongeForge. And so I think I'm going to answer that question, kind of answer that part of the question first, because I think that's what people are mostly interested in. And I consistently kind of the problem is it's between Forge and Velocity, and there are technical reasons why things don't work at the minute. Basically, something called the login plugin packet, and that Forge uses. And on a client, the way effectively the client works is it doesn't disconnect and reconnect to a server. It thinks it's connected to the same server when you're switching. So there is no real kind of login way to reset to the login plugin packet. At least that's kind of my understanding from it from when I first looked into it. So basically, really, this kind of question of what Velocity supporting Forge is a question for between Velocity and Forge. Really, we don't really want to be altering the Forge kind of handshake plugin negotiations. The client negotiation handshake sort of thing. But on Sponge Vanilla, I believe we do have support for it. We have support for the modern protocol. So at least on the Sponge Vanilla side of it, yeah, we would absolutely love to support it. And if for some reason things aren't being supported there, then please PR it or let us know. For Sponge Vanilla, it shouldn't be a problem. But for Sponge Forge, that's something that I think also needs to go to Forge. So that's kind of how I see it.
We've got someone in the crowd who's willing to talk about it. So I'm not sure who 5DB is. Someone in the development team, I presume.
I haven't really kept up with Velocity since I contributed the Forge 112 proxy solution, which I originally put into Bungee Cord. So I don't know who the team are anymore. I just know that it has changed hands. So, but yeah, it really is a complicated problem, and I think some people have kind of looked into working it with Forge, but ultimately it would require a change in Forge to properly support it without another client mod, and that's not really our remit. So we'd like to see it, but it's not necessarily our remit to do that because it would require a lot of it requires a client mod. That's basically the reason. That is a problem. If it was all server side, we'd have probably done something.
And that was the solution that Ragnarok was pushing around a while back. So that's the one we've gone with.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, people are always going to find ways, but I think people would like to be able to switch servers and have it without having to include a mod like that in the server pack. However, it isn't our responsibility. Although we do have some support for client events. Those of you who have worked with the API since API 8 know that we have made the client something very explicit, but it's not really our target so much. We are a primarily server-side API. We're not going to, we generally don't tell people, hey, you need to run Sponge on your server, on your client as well. And so it is not for us to kind of work on that. It is very much a Forge problem. So
we've got our own plugins to worry about, like timings, for example.
Yeah.
Should I not mention that?
That was an interesting one. I'll kind of touch on that. It's basically timings became. We didn't put effort into timings. We need to put a lot more effort into our other systems. And timings, unfortunately, we made the decision to remove it because bad data is worse than no data. And there are other solutions that people can use, including in Minecraft. They have their kind of their flight recorder kind of command, which should be able to do some of the stuff that timings does. Now, that said, another one of the leads, Jeden, had actually taken the timings code and has attempted to port it to, I think again it was 118. It might have been 116, and it is available on his personal kind of repo space, github.com/Jeden/timings, probably timings-core. He hasn't had time to finish it, and if someone would like to take it, run with it, finish it, I think he's pretty much said by all means you're welcome to ask him where it is if you would like to take that on. So he has actually made an effort to kind of spend a little bit of time making a standalone plugin, but ultimately it's something I think we would prefer to see in the community hands, because then the community can drive forward with what they want to see, and we can focus more on developing the API itself. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I've got to say on the timing stuff.
I think that's a good assessment. Well, I'll try and keep up with the questions as they're coming in. So MJRA 0007 asks, are you going to make SpongeForge 1.16.2 stable and the LTS version, or just move to 1.19 for SpongeForge?
SpongeForge. It's a good question. It's not something we fully decided yet, but my guess would be we want to make 1.16.5 stable and move on to 1.18, because Forge is making 1.18 to their LTS version, and that's generally the model I think we're going to follow.
Even numbered versions. Is that what we're following?
it seems to be that's what they're doing at the minute, which is a reasonable thing to do, because that's once a year. It just gives a slightly more static target for mod developers. Now, whether mod developers will do that or they'll try and go for later versions, I mean, it's very difficult for us to predict that. But we generally would like to target the LTS versions, because they're the ones that Forge are going to put more time into, and therefore and support for longer. So mod developers have that static target, and it's therefore more interesting for us to kind of take that version and make that our target.
And there was a follow-up question there from Gberry. Is there a lot left to do for SpongeForge 1.16 release candidate? That's an interesting question.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I could say how long's a piece of string, you know. We just lost the
I think it needs to stop breaking mods first, you know.
Okay.
I think that's part of it. I mean, I can still talk. People can still hear me during this, hopefully. So
yeah.
Look.
Yes, I think we can kind of. We do want it to be stable. Now, I'm hoping in the next couple of months, really. I am aware of some issues, and I've been trying to fix them as I've come across them when I've been doing my own plugins, when people have been reporting to me. Some of the things are kind of tracker stuff and might be slightly more deeply ingrained, but we are we're homing in on that stability. And there is an issue which some people might have seen, and some people have been kind of using a kind of test build from where we have to kind of rejig some of our mixins. So mixins, for those who don't know, are the core of how we hook into Minecraft code. And brainchild of Mumphrey, who isn't with us today, but he has developed this system, and actually it is also the system that Forge mods now can use if they need to sort of do the traditional kind of core modding thing, which makes us a bit more compatible anyway. But we do have the problem where mixins can clash. So we're still trying to go through them and work out how we want to resolve them. There's a bit of work to do with that, but we are working on that. And when I get a bit of time, if no one gets to it first, I'm hoping to kind of do one of the bigger things, which is kind of separate priorities of certain things, so that if a mod comes in to make an edit, it'll either appear on top of ours, or their edit we can then work on top of theirs. We're never going to be 100% compatible with all mods, because some mods will do some very invasive things, and as the plugin API, we're a very invasive kind of thing as well. You know, we make a lot of edits, and so there are just going to be some mods that we can never be compatible with. But, you know, hopefully there are. That is the big thing. I think, you know, it is mod stability, mod capability. So hopefully in the next month or so, we should be able to have something that's kind of we're happy to deal with, and try and start thinking about how we're going to support 1.18, which has its own set of challenges, particularly with, as I mentioned earlier, the Java module system. The Forge loader makes use of that, so we have to work out how we're going to work with that. But yeah, I think that was a very rambly answer to the question of what's the plan. It'll be 1.18 after this, we think.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And as you probably noticed, the server has come back up. This is part of the reason we do label our 1.18.2 builds experimental.
Still in development.
Yes.
It's the phase tracker. Everything's always the phase tracker.
Yeah, blame the face tracker. Yeah.
We can because Gabby's not here.
Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, Gabby couldn't join us again tonight. Unfortunately, otherwise I'd be asking him what's up with that. But yeah, steady progress. We know that Forge is a very important part of our ecosystem, and we are aware of that, and we are making strides to make it more and more compatible by the day.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that one. Let me just quickly catch back up and find us another question. There's one here which does come up every so often from Edeltrick. Are there any plans in the future to support Fabric? Now, I'll just preempt Jill and say this has been brought up, and essentially the answer is if the community wants to make a port of Sponge API to Fabric, they are welcome to, but it is not a focus of the core team. I might get Jill to elaborate on that a little bit, though.
Yeah. I think I'd love to say we have the manpower to do it, but we don't. And that's the problem. That's why we kind of say if the community wants to look at it, it is a huge undertaking. But if the community, we're quite happy if the community says, "Hey, we want to base," because someone has tried this. If you want to base it on our Sponge Common kind of code, you are more than welcome to do that. We are more than happy to do it. It is licensed as such. If you say, "Hey, we need these couple of things to change so that it will be still compatible with Sponge Vanilla and your Sponge Forge, but it will help Sponge Fabric or whatever it'll end up being," then by all means. But we don't have the manpower right now, and that is the ultimate problem. And I understand that might be disappointing for some of you to hear, and it's disappointing for me to be able to say that. I would love to sort of see a burst of activity that we can kind of say, okay, let's have a look at it, let's see if it's viable. But we just don't have that manpower right now, so it's not on the cards right now, and I am sorry to say that. I really am. But if you get a group of people together who want to work on that as a third-party implementation, we're open to talking to you. We're not going to do that. We're going to say, here's our advice. If you've got a few questions, if you we will more than happily talk to you about it. So.
Yes, I might remind everyone. Some of you weren't around back then. We're going back to the dark ages, back when Sponge first started. Well, back in 2015, I believe.
The Yellow Ages.
Yes, the Yellow Ages. So back then, there were actually quite a few other implementations of Sponge API. So Sponge started out being explicitly Forge only. And we had other projects like Granite, which eventually folded in and became Sponge Forge. I think we had Neptune powered. There are several other projects all implementing Sponge API. So you don't actually have to be a part of Sponge to implement Sponge API. The API is open. It's for anyone to use. If you're particularly talented or have a good team, you're more than welcome to try implementing that on another platform. And in fact, we'd be happy to see it. Like, we'd love to see Sponge get out more. So we'd be willing to help talk to anyone, help guide people through. But yes, we don't have the manpower to focus on a third platform. Sponge Vanilla and Sponge Forge are quite a lot as is. And it's essentially having two moving targets. So a lot going on there. I'll move along here, not so much to a particular question, as there's a long-running discussion about plugins and OR and so forth. Faith, did we have anything to update on OR, or are we good with that? I know someone did ask about Hanger as well.
Yes.
Hanger, I'll let Joel talk about that one.
Well, I basically don't have much to say on Hanger. I mean, ultimately, we've kind of keeping an eye, kind of kind of giving our kind of input as needed. But I think ultimately what's going to happen is Hanger will be developed, and then we will look to make our customizations on top of it. That's basically what we're looking to do. There's not really much else to say about it at the minute, because I know someone who asked, I think it was 5DB, I think, who asked this. He did ask just before the server went down. I caught the question. He mentioned, I've looked at it, I've worked on it. What's the state? What's our viewpoint? And I think ultimately at the minute, it's a complicated project, and I know that it's mostly kind of trying to clone our behavior with OR, and so there's no real need to kind of otherwise say, hey, you should or shouldn't do that, and from my point of view, it's not something that I've made an active I've not actively been keeping up with it, because there's a lot of other stuff I've had to actively keep up with. So I think that's a question that's probably better answered than maybe someone else who has been. I don't know if anyone here today is kind of able to answer it more than that. On OR itself, we are still kind of making a few updates to it. I made the update to remove the warning about it's not been reviewed, as we've changed from a proactive to a reactive review state. I will take this opportunity to remind people that anything that you download from OR hasn't been reviewed by us. Just be aware, standard internet stuff, people. And if you find something bad on OR, please report it. There is a flag option, and we will then take a look at it. But we have got a few things kind of in the pipeline. We might still get our view-based branch out if we get the time to work on it before Hanger is stable and viable for us. But that's kind of remaining relatively static for now. So that's all really.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit to cover there. I did see some other discussion, which is sort of talking about plugin development and being put away in private discords and such. And just like a brief comment on that, where, of course, nothing opposed to that, and people are more than welcome to do their own thing. But we do always welcome people making things open and contributing to the ecosystem as well. That's what the Sponge Project's about, and we think that'd be good. That's just our philosophy in general. So moving along, let's see. This one's a interesting if pointed question from Richard Whatever. Why do you need so much time to update? Well, that's a bit spicy. I'll let Joel talk about that one.
We're volunteers.
Yeah.
Minecraft modding is a huge thing. Have you tried it? I think that's quite simply, if you wanted to go faster, come and help us. I understand the frustration. I'm frustrated as well. Unfortunately, I hate to say it, but my life has taken over a lot more than I thought it would. And I'd love to spend more time on Sponge. And that's the point. People have lives. We do this as a labour of love. We don't do this as a product. We don't have SLAs. Please help us if you can. We understand. I understand the criticism.
Please help us.
But no, this is it. At the end of the day, help us. Every bug report has been helpful. We do read them. We do discuss them. We do think about them. Sometimes I can't come up with the answer straight away. We do, people bringing code. We really appreciate that. People writing the plugins, helping our platform to grow, people giving us ideas. All of that is so useful to us. We know it's taken some time. The Mojang code base is changed significantly. We took the time to take API 8, and it was a much bigger break than we expected it to be. We understand that too. We understand all of that. If you wanted to go faster, help. And that is as simple as that.
Yes, yeah. I think that's a really good thing to bring up. As some people mentioned, yes, like a lot of our team has actually been quite busy. It's been an interesting year for a lot of people. They're off doing all sorts of tasks and catching up on things. So it's all very exciting and there's lots going on. And sometimes that means we don't have as much time to dedicate to the things that we really love to do. Like Sponge is a labour of love, genuinely. People have been working on this project for what are we at now? That's almost 7 years. No
Yes, that's
monetary
right.
contributions, no nothing. It's purely because we love the project and we want to contribute to the Minecraft ecosystem and provide something for all the players and fill a niche. Sometimes that's a big job to do, but we
Yeah.
love to do it.
Absolutely, but I think if I can ask you then, Owen. So Raz has kind of asked another question, and I think it kind of feeds onto this. So I'd like to see if even if we can just take it away and try and work out what we're going to do, because that comment is a good one in that we haven't done a state sponge in a while, or even just a fireside chat or something like that. And I think it's a valid criticism that we might have been a bit quieter on these bigger community engagement events. And I'm guilty of that. I think that is something
I think one of the
need.
problems is that certain people in management, and we're not blaming Dual here, don't want to do a state of sponge unless absolutely everything is perfect and all the ducks are in a row. And how often does that happen?
I think.
Yeah.
I think ultimately, Owen here in Inscrutable, and there are a few others in our community team. I think I accept we need to get our heads together, and I'm responsible. I'm a leader of this. I'm responsible for not being as good at the community this community organization than I could have been, and I can only apologize for that. And I think that we need to bring that back. We need to work out what we're going to do. Even if we're just doing events like this, we're not doing anything fancy. We've not got all the fancy graphics you're seeing today. Is literally me on the top of a stage talking, and sometimes that's all we need.
Yes. Yeah. I'd like to, if I can, just talk about that a little.
So. Yeah, please do so.
So that I think that sort of ties into a bit of the dev philosophy as well that we've been following. So earlier we have been going for a sort of more perfectionist approach, both in community and in dev. We've been wanting to try and get everything all lined up and perfect and put it out there. And I think now we're realizing it's probably a better approach for the community that we move. I wouldn't say quite move fast, but move at a steady pace and break things and take things as they come. So if I could, I'd like to throw back to the community and open up, because this isn't just Q&A in one direction. I'm flipping the table here. We're going to turn around the other way and ask the community, what would you like to see us do more of? Because we've got our sort of steady thing of status updates, which I'm trying to increase the frequency of a little. I'm hopeful to do some more toned down State of Sponge events like this. They don't have to big productions like we have done in the past. But what else would you like to see? I'd quite like to hear that. I'll leave some time for the chat to catch up.
Yeah. Let's see what other questions we've got while we're thinking about that. Yeah, let's get some other questions going. Let's see what else there is. We can kind of come back and start going through the feedback. Before I say continue with this, the feedback doesn't stop when we end the stream. Please continue. We're not always brilliant to the engagement thing. I fully accept that. I am often less available than I'd like, and then I forget about things and all that, and I can only apologize for that. But the feedback doesn't stop. Please continue with that. Okay, Owen, what have we got on questions? Have we got any other questions that are burning amongst our community?
Okay, let's quickly take a look. I'll get back to the comments on my questions a bit later. Does the planning or implementation taking so long? So I think the question there is more what part of that takes longer, figuring out what to do or actually implementing it? And I'm fairly certain I know the answer, but Joe?
It's both. Was that what you were expecting?
Yes.
So software is a lot more complicated. In fact, I would probably argue that implementing it feels like it's generally going to be easier than your design process. The design process takes a long time, right? Particularly if you're writing the API. It takes a long time trying to design something that is usable, good, something that you guys would, as plugin developers, would really want to see. And we're trying to expose as much of the engine as possible. We don't always do the best job. Some of the APIs that we've developed are being rewritten later on. in like 9 and 10. Sometimes a necessity, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, actually this fits better in this way. But then when you get to implement it, you realize, oh, I can't do it. And it's particularly difficult in the Minecraft sphere, specifically when you're hooking into Minecraft code, because mixins, you have to be really careful. You have to look at the bytecode. You have to look at where it is, what's it doing, and so there is an additional complication when it comes to developing for Sponge and for things that use mixins in particular, because you don't only have to think about your own code, but you have to think about someone else's, and you have no control really over what that someone else code is. So it's an equal challenge in equal parts, really. I find it, it is a challenge. That's why I do this. I think it's a fun challenge. It's why I like to do it. If I thought it was boring, I wouldn't be doing it. But it's a really interesting challenge, and I like kind of looking at both ends of the spectrum when I get time. So again, rambly answer, but I kind of like to kind of give a bit of context. It is both. But when it gets working and when it's right, it's so much fun and it's so nice. That rush is so great. So interesting question. I liked it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that one. I'll quickly get back to the question I put out there before moving on to the others that we've received. So Mister in Twitch was talking about he'd love to hear some developers just announce what they've worked on, if that be on the Discord or on the Sponge forums, much in the same way graphics designers of games sometimes publish stuff before the game release. So that's something I've been meaning to do. So I'm hoping to get that out hopefully next week. Moving to, was it the Sponge development update or something similar? I haven't quite decided on the name, but the idea there is that we will essentially go through and curate a selection of commits and pull requests and new API changes and implementation changes, whatnot. We'll find a bunch of interesting things that the devs have worked on and put those out there, as well as stuff that's in progress from the community. Like, as I said, pull requests. People are more than welcome to submit pull requests. And I'd like to post ones and discussions, like put links there for essentially the major things, the things that are moving or that we would like to see more discussion and contribution on. And just try and do some more outreach on the dev side of things, because I think most of the announcements have been more focused on the sort of community side of updates and just like what this means for users and some plugin developers, but not so much like the actual development of the project itself. So I'm hoping to move a bit more in that direction, and that will be in addition to the Sponge status update. So ideally, this is me saying it and not necessarily committing, but ideally I would like to have those alternating, so perhaps one per month of each. So one at the end of the month, one in the middle. In an ideal world, we'll see how that pans out, but that's what I would like to do. So yeah, that's definitely something we've considered, and I'm hoping to move more in that direction. Now, we did also have another comment on the server itself. Let me just go back and find that. So I believe there was a comment from Ragnarok on orphaned plugins on OR. And that one's, that's an interesting one because, as mentioned by Inscrutable on the server as well, they are sort of out of control. It is third-party stuff. But of course, the beauty with open source projects is open source licenses. If you see a orphan plugin no one's worked on in a while, if the license permits it, you may be able to take that plugin yourself and update it. If the license permits it, that's more than welcome to. And I'd say a name change is probably necessary to resubmit on all, but there's no inherent reason why someone can't adopt plugins and re-release them if the license is permitting. So that is a third-party thing.
At the same thing, couldn't we?
We could do. Ideally, people would pool resources and work on one big project like we do here with Sponge. But I'm not mandating it, and I don't think we have any rules mandating that, just as long as it's not a copy-paste. Make sure it's innovative.
So, just to add to that, everything everyone's just said there is true. Our Sponge Guidelines actually does have a point on forks, in that we do ask that see if you can just kind of reach out to the author and say, hey, I'd like to take it over. Because if that happens, that's the best of both worlds, because you might be able to take it over with the same name and all that. So we do suggest, see if you can get in contact, but we're not shutting you out if you can't. We do say that's probably the best thing to do. It's the polite thing to do. If it clearly has been abandoned, or if the plugin developer says, hey, feel free to fork it, but please don't use this name. Yeah, please just go ahead, try and update it, put it on OR, credit the original author, credit where credit's due, guys, and yeah, go for it. So it kind of ties into something I'm just kind of reading here in the server chat, in that, can we announce when these sort of things are updated and all that? It's a difficult one again, because really we don't want to be endorsing specific plugins. It is more to do with the plugin development side, but we definitely would encourage the people that do that. Is there a way that we can make plugins more visible? We have all, but is that visible enough? Is there a better way we can do it? I actually don't know. I do not know the answer to that. What would be a better way of doing it? Could we perhaps in some way, because Discord is used by a lot of people, everybody here is probably on Discord, that's probably the first port of call for a lot of things now. Is there a way we can kind of have a feed of what is updated on OR available as one of those update channels? I don't know. That was just an idea. It just comes to mind. It's a bit of work. Could we do it? I don't know. Any of these ideas, let's see what people think, because not all of them are necessarily going to be valid. Not all of them are going to be viable, but something might stick. So let's have those ideas, and if anyone comes up with them, let's not dismiss them out of hand. I think there is a valid point of visibility of plugins. Can we make them more visible? Probably. Actually, yes. How? Don't know.
Yeah. So I think as well there. Let me just rephrase how I'm going to answer. I'll say that. Actually, yeah. So something I'll bring up there, with regards to talking about plugins, as Jewel mentioned, we don't really want to be seen to be endorsing specific plugins. We don't want to bring on any sort of accusations of favoritism, or even potentially imply that to developers, because we don't want to be in the position here are all these big plugins that we give lots of attention to and shout out to the community, and potentially use some smaller ones by the wayside. We want to let that be a more sort of open thing. But something I think would be good for a non-staff, non-developer member to do is for potentially community members to step into the breach there. So if people want to do something like a newsletter or something that goes through, finds an interesting plugin, runs through an introduction or talks to the developer and posts that in the forums and links that in Discord and so on, be more than welcome to. In fact, I would love to see stuff like that. It doesn't just have to be top down. We would love to see more stuff happen from the bottom up. If there's something you want to do, if there's some sort of newsletter that you want to make, more than welcome to. Or even just little forum posts talking about this interesting use case you found for a plugin that no one's documented or so on. Please put that out there. We would love to see more stuff like that. Do not think that this project is purely top down. The community is so important to us. And in fact, that's also where a lot of us in the community side of things got our start. So similar to devs, with community, a lot of us would do little things, post updates, put together newsletters, or talk to people and do networking and so on. And that was a really good way to start getting involved in community. And eventually a lot of us in different projects, a lot of us did that in previous projects. That was a way to pick up the skills that we needed to move on and upskill and work with the community and manage it. So please do that. It's a really good way to get started. Don't think that it has to be someone up the top gives you something to do. Take initiative, go out and do it, and people will appreciate that. Genuinely, people appreciate it. I've seen it a lot of times, and that's how community projects like ours work.
Yeah, I mean, my first kind of development in kind of the Minecraft sponge sphere in particular was it was the Bungie called support in so then 1.8 and 1.10. But also because I was writing Nucleus, I was wanting to write that Essentials plugin, that Essential style plugin, because there wasn't really any that I liked for a server I was helping run at the time. I don't run a server anymore now, but I then kind of contributed to Sponge because of those things that I need. And if plugin developers kind of feel comfortable enough and they're like, actually, that's something that would be really cool that they don't do, but we think that would be something that would fit, please just feel free to kind of even just say, hey, I've got this idea, because we love to hear from you and all that. And that's that's how I got my start. That's how most of the developers got their start. Faith here, he edited the inventories one time, and we yanked him in. Well, he was here before me actually, but he got yanked in. So,
I still don't know how that happened.
yeah, it's kind of a magic trick. So please feel free to kind of. We don't want to bite. We don't bite. We want to kind of work with the community because that's who we're here for. And there are other community members. We've had people come into the docs team because they've done docs stuff. We've had people that come into the community and moderation because they've done community things. How many of you remember Soaked Up? That was back in 2016, 2017, right?
Oh, that was a while back. Throwback,
right?
there.
But
Didn't last long though.
well, it was a few. I actually quite enjoyed reading it. And
I really enjoyed it too.
We actually did end up pulling Doot into the fold. He is actually one of our moderators. So yeah, just to back up what Owen was saying.
Yeah, so Rasmog has followed up there saying that it would need to be started by the Sponge community team, and this is where I think it's a good example. Like Soaked Up, that was not started by us, and we all in the team we all really enjoyed that. If you want the team to give guidance or help you out, more than happy to reach out. Like we're more than happy to help guide us. It's just we don't want to be in a position of potentially, picking winners and saying we endorse this plugin. But if you want to do something and potentially, you have a plugin that does something cool with the API and you'd like to talk with the person who developed the API along with the plugin, sure, we can help sort that out. So yeah, we're more than happy to help people get started or to link people up and network them. Don't be intimidated. We're here to help. But yes, we'd like that to be a more community-driven process. But as I said, we are going to try and do more stepping up with the dev side of things, announcing all the changes and commits and pull requests there, in addition to our status updates, and hopefully a third or fourth or fifth community contribution can help with that. We'd welcome it. Let's see. So moving on, we've had a lot of discussion. The Twitch chat sort of talking about our philosophy with regards to updating Minecraft and breaking the API. So there's a few questions about what our approach to that is. Do we try and go for a fixed API and damn the changes to the Minecraft codebase, or do we regularly change our API? And from experience, I can tell you it is the latter. So our philosophy is more to do with, we try to give you access to the Minecraft in the sort of purest form, without having to go through all the nitty gritty. I think Jules probably better qualified to talk on this than I am. However,
Yeah,
so I'll pass it over.
API 8 was actually an anomaly. Because Minecraft changed so much, the structures that were there in the plugin development was in the plugin kind of API really wasn't going to fit anymore. So that's why API 8 changed so much, and it did become a victim of perfectionism a little bit, really, which is why it took so long. I'm glad to say it's out now. As an old lecturer colleague that I used to work with said, it can either be perfect or it can be done. And so we're trying to go for it'll be done on that. But what that inevitably means, as I said previously, was that things sometimes just don't work the way you think they're going to work. They don't kind of follow the... you write the API, you write the implementation, and then you realize, that's not going to work. And so the API, ignoring world generation for a second, the API 9 and upcoming API 10 are actually going to be very similar to API 8. There are a few differences. As well as world gen, we've had to deprecate a couple of things and create replacement APIs because they didn't work the way we expect them to, or they're not going to work in the future. But the intention is that API 8, 9, and 10, as long as you're not touching world generation, they will generally plugins will generally work without issue across all of those versions. So while we have made that horrible break from API 8, we don't intend for that to happen again. We intend for it to be a much smoother kind of, your plugin should work in general across versions. But we will retain this kind of major version probably per Minecraft version, just to give us that little bit of leeway and to be able to evolve with the times and just say, hey, we have these changes. So
yeah, I think that's a good
kind of what
assessment.
we're looking at now. There will likely be changes between API versions, but they will not likely be major except for world generation at this time.
Yes. It has been interesting, hasn't it? The API 7 to 8 was definitely a big shift, but it's been interesting seeing API 8 to 9. Fairly minor. Most stuff worked fine, and in fact, a lot of plugins that were built for API 8 just seem to work on API 9 implementations. Now, that is not to say all of them, especially World Gen. It might be good to talk a little about what has gone wrong with the World Gen, and inform people as to why that's a very complex task to handle at the moment.
Mojang's just breaking it in the background. As they're trying to move to a more data pack based system, things are changing in the background to support that more and more, and they're kind of doing the same things we are. Someone asked earlier about implementation, design, all that sort of stuff, and I suspect that's what they're doing. They're kind of going through implementations, and then they want to do something else and realize, oh, that probably doesn't work as much as we thought. So I think that's part of it, and so we kind of have to keep up with that. And it's difficult. We know it's a moving target at the minute, which is kind of why World Gen's kind of in a bit of a special place at the minute. In fact, we were almost caught unawares. They broke things in World Gen from 1.18.1 to 1.18.2, and had we have released API 9 for 1.18.1, we'd have had to have broken the API to continue to support World Gen. Now, that is not an excuse for us to say we're going to wait for like 4-point releases or 2-point releases or whatever to release an API version. That isn't actually our intention at all. It was just lucky as we were still getting to grips with our new kind of API version. But World Gen is World Gen's complicated anyway. It's an immense task, kind of deterministically designing a world based on a seed or whatever. It's nuts. That this is all generated based on an algorithm. And I have, it's not something I've ever looked into, and I am always in awe, like, wow, this is quite interesting. But there's a lot of complication that's going into it to make it more data pack friendly. So we're just kind of having to keep up with that in the minute. Faith's done some good work. I believe he's found some ways to abstract some of it out so we can reduce the breaks in future, but no promises. I am not going to actually say that and kind of put the pressure on him. If we have to break it again, we will do. And that is the benefit of why we have our major API versions mostly aligned to Minecraft versions. So we're not afraid to break, but we will try not to break unless it really makes sense to do so in the future.
Yeah, I think that's good. And yeah, the World Gem was certainly interesting. We don't expect that sort of thing to happen on a point release, but evidently it does. So yes, that's remaining. Well, we'll fix that up at a later date, but most of the remainder of the API is fairly consistent. Maybe small changes people need to work on to update plugins, but it's a lot nicer. It'll be a lot nicer to update from API 8 to API 10 than it will have been from 7 to 8. I think we can say that with a good degree of certainty.
Yeah, some of us who have authored larger plugins, so Faith and I in particular, we've been through that pain, and we don't want to go through that pain again. I'm sure Faith is nodding, kind of maniacally, kind of there. So we understand that we don't want to go through that again, so we don't intend to make you go through it again. the plan going forward is we'll keep things as stable as we can, but be aware we will tell you, we will deprecate things. Some things that are deprecated in API 8.1 that were then removed in 9. So if you keep up with the point releases, your IDE will generally give you warnings for things that we are intending to break. We can't always give that full warning, but for the plugin developers, just keep that in mind. Just keep up with the latest minor versions, and you might pick up where we're planning to break things, and we'll tell you how to fix it. So.
Yep. I think that's a good assessment. There's been a lot of interesting discussion on that. Some people mentioning that they like the opportunity to refresh and rethink how they approach things, which is good. Like as a reminder, a lot of these projects, they're all people starting out with programming, or people who have experience programming, just having fun and see what they can do. The sense of renewal is nice. Of course, we do appreciate people like things to be consistent, and once built, if you can, don't have to fix them again later on. That's always nice. So there's a balance to be struck there, and we're hoping to be striking that.
Yeah, absolutely.
In line with that sort of thing, will you launch 1.19? So are you already working on it? From Richard Whatever. And interestingly, right before we started this, Faith actually mentioned whether we'd like to show 1.19 running in a development environment. So Faith, I think you're the one to talk to about that. How's 1.19 going?
Yeah, we still have a few API changes that need to be done. But yeah, it's running. Stuff might be broken still. I haven't tested everything. But yeah, we have one branch where I have all of my world-gen changes, and another one without them. And both of those branches are currently running. So
there you go.
You can pull it.
Did anyone hear that? It's very quiet.
Yes, I'll just repeat for anyone who can't hear it. So 1.19 does run. So Sponge Vanilla 1.19 does run. Of course, how well it runs and whether it breaks, those are different questions entirely, but it does at least start and can be used. So quality user experience at this stage is probably something to be desired, but I can't comment on that. So hopefully we can get some experimental builds out and put them out to the community, see how it works, and start getting feedback to see what needs fixing. And actually, interesting little follow-up there. Envyful asks, why is there such a significant focus on Sponge Vanilla over Sponge Forge? So I should clarify with the 1.19, that is Sponge Vanilla. I'll let Jill take that question.
It's much faster to develop for. So basically, our Sponge Forge and Sponge Vanilla code bases are actually very close. I would say 85 to 90% of the code is common. So with that in mind, all we really have to do for Sponge Vanilla is a few things that are basically going to be different from Forge. So Forge does make some edits to some of the base classes. We have to account for that, but they're quite few and far between. Having Sponge Vanilla running while we're waiting for our Sponge Forge to catch up because of whatever reason, so that might be because Forge hasn't released yet or whatever, as we kind of get more and more going into that. Having Sponge Vanilla running lets us see what the basic changes are, what we need to do, because these things directly translate into Forge. So it makes our development for Sponge Forge much quicker. We have to worry about the loading changes and maybe some mod compatibility things on Forge. That is then what our focus is. Sponge Vanilla is also used by quite a few large networks. I'm actually aware of this. And if Sponge Vanilla is effectively almost, it's not free, but it's kind of cheap to make, and something that we always like to have a vanilla sort of code base running, then why not? Now, we don't have statistics on whether Sponge Vanilla is used more than Sponge Forge. It's not something that we have. My suspicion is probably not, but I don't know that for sure. SpongeForge is behind because we're still getting to grips with the new Forge toolchain. That's basically it on that.
Yeah, so there've been a few sort of follow-up questions. I'll just read them as comments before asking anything. So let's see. Ragnarok says here, why is there such a significant focus on competing with Spigot over helping the Forge modded server community that gave most use to Sponge? So as Jules sort of said, it's that same sort of thing. It's not about focus like competing with Spigot at all. It's that's the current version of Minecraft. It helps us to keep up to date with the changes in Minecraft, and Forge does take longer to build their versions and release that. So even if we were able to do things basically instantly, which we can't, but Forge would always be behind vanilla, and there's little cost to doing vanilla per se, because we would have to do that same thing with Forge later. So we just do it with vanilla now, and then port it to Forge when that happens. And Sponge Vanilla, the focus there is sort of keeping up to date more so. So Sponge Vanilla, you'll notice that we quite consistently try and jump to the new version relatively quickly. Sometimes that might take longer than we'd like, but we make an effort to do that. So Forge will always be a bit behind, but yes, it's nothing to do with us prioritizing one over the other. It's more so that's just how the toolchain works out.
I mean, I understand why that's the viewpoint. I can kind of understand that. The other thing about Sponge Vanilla is that it's our loading code and such isn't likely now to change across vanilla versions, so we will effectively get vanilla for free. And by having the vanilla available as quickly as possible, it aids plugin developers so that when a Forge version does come around, they can have the confidence that it works in vanilla, and if it doesn't work in Forge, well, then they can tell us and we can fix it. We're finding this, I'm finding this with my plugin. So, I understand the frustration, and I think, again, some of it is down to the Forge loading code and the way that Forge is kind of architected, because it's in 1.18, for example, it's trying to bring the modular system in. We don't quite know how that's going to work yet. We are thinking about it. So, that's kind of it, really.
Yeah, so as Faye said, 90% of it's share code. There's very little that's competition. It's just how the toolchain works. Like with Sponge Vanilla, one thing I should point out is developers have been able to build Sponge Vanilla for snapshot releases and start getting us up to date and checking out what's coming up, which is very useful for us planning the API. We're working on something now and we say, they've changed that in the next release. Maybe we should rethink how we're doing it. So it's just useful. Useful part of how we approach things.
I think there are reasonable points being made about SpongeForge and all that, and it because of all the changes in vanilla itself, which of course translate to Forge, it's easier to work out what's going on in a vanilla workspace than it is a Forge workspace. And I understand the frustration, and I think it is fair to say that it's taken a bit more of a backseat when perhaps it shouldn't have done, and I think I can only apologize for that. I am trying to spend a bit of time in the SpongeForge kind of arena when I can, because I know that's where, from my plugin point of view, that's where most of my users are. And it's just kind of getting to grips with the additional Forge loading system and kind of how we can play nice with mods, and that's a very difficult problem to solve sometimes. So, we are looking at it. We are interested in SpongeForge, and I certainly am. I'm trying to make sure that we can get things running on SpongeForge. I have an issue that I have to look at. I guess I said about the mixing priority and all that, so I am still looking at making it stable. It's definitely not dead to us.
Ragnarok also, if I can just hop in for a sec, Ragnarok did also just bring up something where it did say it does appear that I'm prioritizing Sponge Vanilla first in the State of Sponge updates.
I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just comment there. Where I write the State of Sponge updates, I do those in terms of like Minecraft and API version, going from newest to oldest. So that's just how it works out. I'm happy to flip those around. There's purely arbitrary.
I don't think the order
I think-
really matters. I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, at the end of the day, if there's a strength of feeling in the community as well, we just have to kind of be receptive to that.
Yeah.
And I think, I am 100% understanding of that sentiment, and I haven't, I would like to say I haven't forgotten it. The people who are most likely able to work on it, we've all been really busy. I can't explain why it is. A lot of personal stuff's going on that I know about, and I understand that, but I am trying to learn a bit more. Learn myself more about the SpongeForge system and trying to get all these sort of changes in place. So please rest assured that I do want to make this a success, because I know the modded community. Sponge has been important to the modded community in the past, and I want it to be important to the modded community in the future.
Yep, that's good.
Just to kind of close the question off, I actually understand that sort of it seems like we're prioritizing Sponge vanilla stability before SpongeForge usability. Yeah, I can see why it looks that way, and I understand that. And I think, again, that's partially been an artifact of us kind of trying to get the implementation working, because improving Sponge vanilla stability is potentially going to improve SpongeForge stability, but the point that they're making is that it's about mod compatibility and things as well. And because of that, there are more variables, and it's as Inscrutable says, there are more things. It's just harder to get right, and it is. But I think ultimately, if we improve Sponge vanilla, SpongeForge follows, because it basically uses Sponge vanilla as a base minus the plugin loading code. But I take that on board. I think it is an important point that's being made. And I get it. I do get it, and I think it's a point that we need to take away.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done on the messaging side, so I'll certainly take that into consideration and see what we can do. And just to sort of comment on some stuff that came up during that discussion there, I think with regards to messaging and talking more about the SpongeForge community and the people and servers behind that's a really interesting one, because obviously that's a lot broader than just Sponge. Like, we talk about just what can be done with Sponge, but there is so much more. There is that interaction with other plugins, other mods, other mod packs and environments, and there's a lot that can go on. So I think that could be a good opportunity for someone to do like a community newsletter, or even just highlights. Find a server that's running Sponge and Forge mods and see what they're doing. Like, because case studies, really helpful with these kind of things. If there's a server out there doing something really interesting with both of those, it'd be awesome to see someone bring that out, show what's happening there, give other people inspiration for what they can do with it. It's obviously just quite complex when you've got all those interactions where we sort of try and keep things simple, just what's changing on our side. But even 1.12 servers, people are welcome to talk about those. There's nothing wrong with that. Sure, Sponge has moved on more to working on 1.16 and further, but you're still welcome to talk about it. But yeah, so I think that's sort of been a long discussion there, so I might try and find a new question if we have any. Looking at the chat, that seems mostly to be it. So, and some people, yes, they're coming. It is getting a bit late, so we will try and wrap things up relatively soon, I think.
I'm just going to. Envyful's just mentioned, jumping back to the proxy issue, there is a server-side change required for a modern Forge proxy support. Is SF willing to make that change, or is it fault mixing required? It's not. It's a client-side issue. We will make the server-side issues. We've already had a contribution for putting the modern stuff in. I'm fairly sure that has been done already, but there's the client side issue. But as you say, you've made the client side fix. It should be in Forge, because we're not really interested in kind of telling people you have to install Sponge as part of a mod pack. I think it's the sort of thing that really should be in Forge. And if you're kind of creating a mod pack that clients have to download, then it might just be a case of right now you put the mod on the server as well. So, I mean, ultimately, we can't, I'm very much kind of not really sure that I want to kind of fix what Forge isn't doing on, and that's it. It's because there's a client-side mod involved. I think ultimately that's the problem. I think if there wasn't a client-side mod, I would be more than willing to sort of support that.
Oh, this is an interesting one. Not related to Sponge at all. There have been many implementation servers in different languages. Which language framework would you choose at devs? So I think there's sort of two approaches to this. Obviously, we have our Kotlin and Scala fans here, which are other languages compatible with Java. But then I guess if you were to do it from the ground up, or if Minecraft was written in another language and you got to write mods for it, what language would you like that to be?
That's an interesting question, isn't it? And it is a good question. I mean, do bear in mind that there is another version of Minecraft altogether that's in C++, I believe, with a C# modding layer. I don't really know too much about Bedrock Edition, right? I don't know too much about it. But it's funny enough, I think Inscrutable said Scala semi-sarcastically, but I would probably say Scala, or I would say F#, probably. Something more functional. That's kind of
as long as people are being consistent about their approach to Scala. I understand that's one of the issues that some people have some assumptions, some have others, and they're not inconsistent within their approach to the language, but they're inconsistent with your way of using it.
Yes, that is a big problem in Scala. I mean, I love the language, but I love the way I use it. You're absolutely right. There are other ways to use it that I would go, why are you doing that?
Yeah, if we were using Scala, we'd probably have to put a manual, a style manual in there to make sure people don't go around things.
Yeah. People actually talk about Kotlin as well. I would be up for that. I think Kotlin's a halfway house between Java and Scala. So, I mean, that's not an unreasonable choice in that regard as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting question, quite philosophical, really. Yeah, I mean, Scala would be my
modular 2.
My choice. Mm-hmm.
I like this comment from the number one earliest fan. My issue with Kotlin is that it started with the letter K, and it's just an ugly letter. Pointed opinion, but duly noted.
Yeah,
I can't comment.
I mean, just to be clear, Kotlin's quite an interesting language. I've not done much with it, but yeah, I think it's an interesting language and something that people should have a look at. If they kind of interested in that sort of thing. So we're not getting a Pascal version. We're not doing it.
Yeah.
Just saying.
There is a counterpoint here. In the interest of balance, we have another contribution saying, I quite like the letter K. So letter K, contentious issue. We'll get more from you from the English language later on.
Yeah. Yes. Cool. So yeah, that's my opinion. Have we got other kind of anything else that's coming up?
I think that's mostly it. I'll just quickly check the chat logs and make sure I haven't missed anything.
One thing I will bring up myself is just in terms of what are our roadblocks at the moment with 1.16.5, because I know that the development of Sponge Forge has been somewhat slow, and there are a number of issues amongst there that is kind of thorny. That means it won't work with certain types of mods, or at least won't work properly. We get any kind of roundup about what we need to clean up there to get that working and something closer to release worthy? We
need to sort out the mods plugins directory thing. Something I actually haven't mentioned yet. We are still looking at it. I believe there's one or two kind of hiccups that occurred with that. The reason we want to do it is because effectively, I think we found there were. So it's a more Jeden question, as he was the one that was working on it. But I believe there was problems with loading when you have kind of plugins with mixins in, and it kind of started getting a bit thorny and sometimes didn't work. So it kind of made sense to make that separation. But it was it was something that people were interested in doing in the first place. You know, for 112 in particular, people were always asking, "Oh, can we have a plugins folder? Can we have a plugins
So
folder?"
these were mix-in plugins, were they basically?
Yeah. I think that's what it was. I don't quote me on it because it wasn't really my area. I haven't touched a huge amount of the forged loading code. I've done a fair bit of the vanilla stuff, but not the forged stuff. And yeah, I think it was just kind of making a bit of a cleaner separation because people had been asking for that, but it just hasn't been done yet.
Okay, I thought I'd ask because, you know, ever since the earliest release of Sponge Forge for 1.16.5, I've been doing my best to break it.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we appreciate that because by breaking it, we can fix it, and that makes things better. At least that's kind of the viewpoint I have. I think quite a few of the plugin clash issues, mod clash issues, sorry, will go away when we manage to get the mixing kind of levels separated. So I can't remember which plugin that was.
Okay, but that won't be for World Edit, though. World Edit is still a problem, too.
So World Edit, we have had discussions. I think the problem is because of our tracker code, it's kind of fundamentally changed some of the assumptions they were making. I again, don't know that for sure. And I know there was discussion about making some APIs for them. And we're quite happy to do so. We'd like to make APIs. If someone asked, hey, we can't do this, we would kind of see if there was a reasonable way to make it happen. And if so, how could we make it happen? You know, and what APIs would be good and all that. So we do want to sort of see that support being brought back.
Okay, so there's some collaboration with Engine Hub coming in the future then?
I hope so. I mean, we did have discussed it in the plugins and Sponge channels in Discord. It was like 2 or 3 weeks ago. There was some discussions, and I'd like to see any discussions like that continue. You know, we are trying to be an open door and help where we can. I think, as I say, you know, the ultimate problem, and I think it kind of loops back to some of the first things I said, is manpower. You know, and for all the reasons that there are, we have discussed them. And I hope we can increase it in the future. You know, I'd love it for people who are listening right now if they kind of wanted to roll their sleeves up and see if we can expand our dev team to kind of work on this. It'd be wonderful. You know, that is our ultimate limiting factor. You know, we've only got so many hours in the day, and lots of us have just kind of somehow ended up with really busy lives. I don't know how I've done it, but you know, I know plenty of us do that. So
have children; that'll really destroy your life.
You know,
interesting pitch.
But you know, at the end of the day, we want to see this succeed. You know, I don't think anyone is accusing us of otherwise thinking that, but we are painfully aware of the shortcomings and the problems that we face, and we do want to make this the best platform we can make it. And we get some criticism, and we rightfully get some criticism. We wrongfully get some criticism, but you know, mostly rightfully. And you know, I just want to say thank you very much to everyone listening, and everyone who's not listening that is believing in the Sponge projects and is working with us, willing us along. And you know, we are all appreciating the fact that you're here supporting what we're trying to do. So thank you very much to everybody here and everybody who listens in the future. I assume this is being recorded, otherwise never mind, just the people who are here. It is appreciated, and I know we can be frustrating sometimes, and I understand why people here have had the opinions and said the things they have. Be assured that I have been listening, I have been reading, I have been trying to understand, and I won't always get it right. But I am listening, and so thank you very much for that, and thank you for being with us on this journey. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think that was a really good talk there. So I should note that it's roughly an hour and a half into the stream, and we have had a few comments. Several people saying, we'd like it a bit earlier next time. It's so late already. I'd like to note that this is a international project. So time zones are a very complicated matter. What is late for some, and no doubt into the early hours of the next morning, is very early for others. So this time strikes a balance. We know that isn't perfect for everyone, but we try and make it as accessible as possible. This seems to reasonably work for our community. But yes, it's well understood that timing is a difficult thing. So,
I ideally would like it. As someone in the Europe in the UK time zone, you might be able to tell from my accent. That ideally I'd like it earlier, but ultimately, the people who make this happen. Owen, Inscrutable Worm, who has joined us. We are, they organise this and do a good job of organising it, and it just sucks for them that it's so early, because they are on the other side of the planet. And I have to shout out to you guys. Thank you for making this happen. Thank you for kind of bringing this community engagement. I know we've been struggling a bit, but thank you for doing that. And that is why, unfortunately, the timing is as it is. But it is what it is. We just it sucks for different people for different reasons, and we're mindful of the timing, but unfortunately it's one that isn't really going to change. So I do apologise for that.
Yes, and for any of you, as Australians, I would like to offer you to send your complaints to P. Sherman, 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney. That is our official correspondence address for anyone complaining about the timing.
Or alternatively, Dev Null.
Yes, dev/null also works. But yeah, it is difficult, and we accept that. We'll try and do what we can. Okay, so I think that's largely it for the questions. There's one here saying, will there be a feedback post back after all these questions on Sponge's Discord? I can try and do maybe a little highlight announcement or something, just talking about some of the things that we brought up. I'll see what I can do. Try and get around
we'll discuss it, and it might be, Owen, that we think about adding that on to a status update and kind of talking about it there as well. I think that's probably a good idea, and kind of bringing that in there and saying, here's what people have been saying, this is what happened in the SOS, this is what we're thinking, and let's make it a discussion. We cannot say, you can't say to you, hey, give us an idea, and then we say, here's what we think, and then it's closed.
Yeah. And yes, for those commenting, Twitch should be recording this stream, so then we'll post that in the follow-up later. So we'll see what we can do. And a few comments from people eagerly awaiting 116, so on. So yes, we appreciate your enthusiasm, and we're looking forward to having that for you.
Yeah. So
I think that's about time to wrap it up then. Joel, I'll hand over to you.
So I've done a lot of the sentimental stuff, and if you've listened and gone through that, congratulations, you got through all the sentimental stuff. But once more, I'd like to thank everybody for their contribution, their comments, their discussion, and their interest and their listening, and for being there. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and listen to us, come and ask questions of us. I hope to do this again sometime in the next 2-3 months, maybe. Let's try and do something a bit more regular, a bit more. Let's sit down for an hour and have a bit of a fireside chat. Maybe we'll have a fireplace next time. Can we do that?
Oh, interesting. I think we can. I think we can manage.
Yeah, and a nice sort of comfortable chair. I don't know. Anyway, I'm getting off topic now. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time, and hopefully we'll get to speak to you soon. Until next time, guys, you know where to find us.
All right, perfect. Thanks, all. And that concludes State of Sponge XX. 20 of these. We were here. So we will see you next time. Thanks for attending.
Bye-bye.